You've heard of the honey badger and its more affordable sibling, the sugar weasel. Well, I'd like to introduce you to its unclaimed cousin, the Splenda Rat. So what is it that makes this the most versatile, budget-friendly defense carbine there is? Hey YouTube, welcome back to Arcane Armory. I'm John, and today we're talking about budget, general-purpose defense carbines. Let's get into it. So real quick, before we get started, quick update on the 1903 Springfield project. It's been about 38 degrees, so none of my finishing compounds are going to set up in this, so I'm waiting for a little bit warmer temperatures until we get our shop built. So for right now, that is kind of on pause. I got everything sanded down and ready to go, but we just can't quite put the finishes on it just yet. So a couple of years ago, in an unnamed year, when an unnamed virus of unknown origin, thanks drinker, started causing havoc all over the United States, I thought it might be time for some kind of a general purpose defensive firearm for home defense. So what did that thought process look like? Well, I was in the military for 8 years. I'm familiar with AR-15s, M15 controls.
Dumbass.
So let's start with some kind of general purpose AR-15 rifle. Oh, well, this is a pretty good place to start. This is a 16-inch PSA AR-15, chambered in 5.56. Does leave me a couple of things to desire though. First of all, I wanted something that would focus a little bit more on home defense, which for some means some kind of CQB. Fortunately for me, I'm lucky enough to live inside of a building, which means that in the event of a home invasion, CQB it is. I don't mind a 16-inch barrel, but with a suppressor on it, because firing in a dark and quiet and indoor environment is, well, it's extremely loud and it can break your eardrums. If you've ever fired a rifle indoors in the dark, it is maybe the loudest noise you've ever experienced or will ever experience. And not just for you, it's any other inhabitants of the household or maybe a neighbor that shares a wall or any other number of circumstances. Something with a suppressor kind of came to the top of the list. Oh, well, that's pretty cool. Let's see. That's going to be pretty long.
That's what she said.
Well, that puts our overall length at 43 inches with the stock extended. Might be a little bit on the long side.
Maybe too long.
Let's look for something a little bit shorter, shall we? Oh, hey, now that's more like it. It's really short. 10.5-inch barrel to be exact. Well, let's see how it measures with the suppressor. Handy how that happens. Well, it takes us all the way down to 36 inches with the brace extended. This is a much more compact package, so this can do a lot of the things that the other rifle could do, but it's shorter. But because we've lost so much barrel, I don't know if 5.56 is going to perform the way we want it to. So why don't we chamber that in 300 Blackout? So what is it that makes this the most versatile, budget-friendly defense carbine there is? Well, 300 Blackout cartridge is what does a lot of that. For one, it allows us to shorten the barrel because 5.56 is a fast projectile that relies on its speed for its energy. 300 Blackout has no pretensions of being very fast. It's rather quite slow compared to nearly every rifle cartridge on the planet. Because it uses weight for most of its energy, it kind of works out in the end. So this will send a 220 grain subsonic bullet better than a 45 ACP. And a 150 grain supersonic bullet that'll retain more energy at 300 yards than a 55 grain out of a 5.56. Though, the compromise that you make in that department is in drop. Where the 5.56 may drop 6 inches, depending on how you've zeroed it, 300 Blackout is dropping somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 inches. So that's where our optic comes in. And this one is a Primary Arms SLX with an ACSS reticle, and it has bullet drop compensation built into it. Now, they have it formulated for a couple of predetermined ranges, but you kind of have to look at that on your own depending on what your actual muzzle velocity is. They have no idea of what muzzle velocity you're going to be firing when you pick up a firearm, so their best guess may not be accurate for your conditions. So what we have ended up with here is a compact carbine that excels at subsonic ammunition and doesn't do half bad out to 250 to 300 yards with supersonic ammunition in a package less than $500, of course excluding the can. Now, can I sit here and say that this is just as good as a honey badger or a sugar weasel? No, but I can say that it is good enough. I've run nearly 1,000 rounds through this so far with all kinds of different ammunition, including my own hand loads, and it's never hiccuped one time. It is cycled and fed and fired every single round I've ever put in it. This particular example is from Palmetto State Armory, and I'm not sponsored by them or plugging for them. There are plenty of manufacturers out there that make great budget-friendly parts, but this is one that was available in 2020, so that's what I ended up with. So why 300 Blackout, you ask? Why not 5.56? You guys run 5.56 and a 10.5-inch barrel all the time. Well, 5.56 suffers dramatically when you start shortening the barrel, especially when it starts getting down in that 10 or 12-inch length. When it comes to subsonics, 5.56 basically doesn't offer any decent options. The bullet is too small and it is too light to offer any kind of energy at subsonic velocities. Situations like home defense or CQB, a subsonic round can be quite preferable to a supersonic round if given the option, especially in terms of trying to avoid collateral damage. Now, of course, that depends on bullet construction and whether the faster bullet fragments when it hits a solid object, or if the slower, heavier bullet just keeps trucking right on through things. But if you choose the appropriate bullet construction, over-penetration shouldn't be a concern. But in terms of supersonic ammunition, where 5.56 should excel, it doesn't so much once we start getting rid of all that velocity because of our shorter barrel. Now, just looking at rule of thumb numbers, 5.56 loses approximately 50 feet per second for every inch of barrel length that's removed. So with my load data, a 62 grain 5.56 round out of a 10.5-inch barrel would probably be moving somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500, 2,600 feet per second, which that would result in a muzzle energy of 895 foot-pounds. When we compare that to a 300 Blackout of the same barrel length, with shooting a 150 grain bullet, it leaves the barrel at 1,760 feet per second with a muzzle energy of 1,032 foot-pounds. So that's a little bit of an improvement just at the muzzle, but when we start to get out to 200 and 300 yards, we start to see a little bit of a bigger difference, with 300 Blackout arriving at a 300-yard target at nearly 50% more energy than the 5.56. The obvious compromise here is that you have to deal with a lot more bullet drop, where 5.56 is pretty flat because of its velocity. 300 Blackout starts to fall off the map at that range. So for comparison, in this case, the 5.56 is going to drop about 10 inches, and 300 Blackout is going to drop approximately 30 inches. So you need to account for that in your optics setup and knowing your holds at longer ranges. Another good contender for a shorter barreled AR platform is 350 Legend. One major drawback of the 350 Legend is that it requires different magazines, and those magazines typically have quite a bit lower capacity than our standard AR magazines. The other downside to 350 Legend is that it starts off with as much or maybe a little bit more, sometimes significantly more depending on the load, energy at the muzzle, but that number starts to drop off substantially. It ranges beyond 200 yards. Now, I just set an arbitrary 300-yard goal because when I was in the military, I qualified on a 300-yard range, and I can see that far fairly well. So hitting targets out to 300 yards is nothing new for me, and I wanted a firearm that would have decent ballistics at that range. So at the muzzle, the 350 Legend's got a little more snooze than the 300 Blackout, and at 300 yards, in terms of energy, they're fairly comparable. But in that comparison, where the 350 Legend is the major loser, is in windage. In a 10-mile-an-hour cross breeze, the 350 Legend has almost 10 inches more wind drift than the 300 Blackout does. The 350 Legend is also a solid contender in the subsonic department, as it shoots very heavy bullets as well. The problem with 350 Legend subsonics, again, is low ballistic coefficient. So obviously we're not going to be shooting to 300 yards in a platform like this with these sights in either of those platforms, but just for the sake of comparison, at 200 yards, both subsonic loads are leaving in that 1,050 feet per second range, with the 350 Legend dropping 50 inches at 200 yards. Compare that to 41 inches for the 300 Blackout. That's a 9-inch drop difference just based on the ballistic coefficient. And at the same range, in terms of windage, the 350 Legend drifts nearly twice as much as the Blackout does, with the wind drift of 7.72 inches and the Blackout drifting 4.32. Now at that range, if you can compensate for that, the 350 Legend, because of that heavy bullet, does arrive with a little bit more energy by about 20 foot-pounds. So it's for all these reasons that I think that the combination of the AR in a shorter carbine and the 300 Blackout are the ultimate currently available general purpose self-defense carbines. So let me know what I missed down in the comments. If you like this kind of stuff, please like and subscribe. We're going to do more of this kind of stuff pretty soon, and as soon as I can get my hands on some, we want to do some ballistic gel testing with our 300 Blackout and test some of those more expensive, fancier bullets that have become available for it. So if your self-defense choice firearm can outperform this one, let me know what it is down in the comments. I'd love to hear what it is and check it out, and then maybe we can do a video on that too. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.